Hello everyone, welcome to the semi-finals of Grand Prix Montreal. We are underway here with Max McVitie against Kevin Jones. It is Kevin Jones, the second seed with Team of Marvel, kicks off with a tap land, it's a Lumbering Falls, and Max McVitie with Mardu Vehicles. Jake Van Lunen alongside me in the commentary box. Mardu Vehicles, Jake, well, turns out still a good deck.
Yeah, and one of the things that happened at the Pro Tour last weekend is that we saw a lot of players have their decks hedging to beat Mardu Vehicles. It wasn't uncommon for a lot of decks to follow suit like Sean McLaren did this weekend and play a lot of Dissenter's Deliverance in their main deck. We saw a lot of copies of By Force and sideboards. There were way more Manglehorns last weekend. So Mardu Vehicles was effectively hated out of the Pro Tour. It was the deck people expected to play against the most, and as a result, they built their decks with the intention of having the ability to beat Mardu Vehicles. Coming into this weekend, those cards that people were playing in those slots, a lot of those cards became cards like Sweltering Suns. They became cards like Chandra Flamecaller. And people were thinking, I have to beat zombies. That's the creature deck that they were attempting to beat. And as a result, we're seeing Mardu Vehicles have a bit more success than a lot of people expected this weekend.
All right, so Kevin Jones has opened up with a couple of Attune with Ethers. He's got up to 4 energy, which is going to go to 7 straight away off Whirl of Virtuoso. All energy all the time out of the Team of Marvel deck there. Max McVitie has the classic turn 2 of Heart of Kieran, but no sign of anything crewing it just at the moment. I think that's the first time I've said crew on the stream this weekend. It just shows that Mardu Vehicles have not been particularly prevalent. We've not seen one, you and I, this weekend, as you see the Veteran Motorist, which is becoming more and more true as it sort of sits in deck lists. It's seen plenty of action, and you're going to see it.
It's been around for a bit.
It really has. So, Heart of Kieran and Veteran Motorist.
And you'll notice there the Veteran Motorist fixing Max McVitie's draws for the coming turns, also crewing up that Heart of Kieran, making it into a 5/5.
But now Here we are once again with Aetherworks Marvel in play, 7 energy already on the board. This is exactly what Kevin Jones wanted to do. Energy on 1, energy on 2, energy on 3, Marvel on 4, ready to activate. Here we go. Max McVitie, I mean, Mardu Vehicles is a fast deck. It's not that fast.
Yeah, I mean, here he played a 4-power creature essentially on the second turn, turned it into a 5-power creature and attacked it on the third turn while advancing his board state. And he looks very far behind. And to boot, Kevin Jones has a Whirler Virtuoso, which even without that Aetherworks Marvel would do a really good job of gumming up this board here.
Right, because it represents currently 2 invisible 1/1 flyers, for want of a better term, as things currently stand. But obviously, he's going to, where things are, there's a Marvel. The best use of energy is Marvel almost all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, we can expect Kevin Jones to be tapping this Marvel at some point on Max's turn right now. Probably during combat.
Yeah, so Max is going to send in, and look at Max McVitie going, go on then, what do you got, what do you got? So I see a mountain, it looks like a magma spray, an island, another land that doesn't
Attune with Ether.
That doesn't look like great. I didn't see the first card go by. It is just a magma spray for the Veteran Motorist. That is a pretty horrid return for Aetherworks Marvel #1 here in the semifinals for Kevin Jones.
Yeah, I think that's about the worst one we've seen this weekend.
Certainly right up there. I did hear about an Attune with Ether and 5 land. To be fair, that was rumored, but that was not on camera.
I've had opponents whiff against me on Magic Online for what it's worth. Sometimes.
Well,
I mean, we've all mulliganed into 6-land hands. It's happened.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Kevin, going to need to rebuild his energy count now.
Yeah, just at 1. So here's Attune with Ether. Off we go again. Building up to what that time was not a grand finale. No Olamog even remotely in view. And one of the features that we've seen throughout the weekend, and if you have been with us all weekend, you've certainly seen this happen, the Marvel decks actually start counting towards 10 mana and actually casting Olamog the Ceaseless Hunger.
Yeah, and there are a number of ways to pull that off. For example, Kevin's deck includes a copy of Nissa's Renewal.
So that's the gain 7 life, go and find 3 or up to 3 basics.
Yeah, so he can jump right up to 9, and then he's really close to casting that Ulamog.
Right. And then Paul Dean, who's also in our semi-finals, his version is just to have Shrine of the Forsaken Gods to accelerate into Ulamog at 10.
Exactly, and both of those small pieces of technology have given Kevin Jones and Paul Dean huge edges in Temur Marvel Mirrors throughout the weekend.
So didn't we were together in the last round of the Swiss when Kevin Jones made it through. Didn't you say Kevin Jones is 7-0 in Mirrors, something like that?
I believe so, yes.
7-0s in the Marvel Mirror. Well,
and perhaps 8-0 after that quarterfinal.
Right.
That may have been the 7th one, but...
Right, okay. So let's see whether Jones can get through to a final where there could be another Marvel deck waiting. Paul Dean is in the other semi with Marvel, but in the way is Maxime Aubin with the blue-red control list. He's sort of playing the role of Niels Norlander, who is the blue-red player in Santiago. Boom.
Yeah, and it hungers.
Archangel Avacyn in response. Okay.
Yeah, Archangel Avacyn's a very powerful card, but it's not quite as powerful as Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger.
Not quite as good?
No. Especially considering the extra life that Kevin has access to with this Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot. It's going to be really hard for Max McVetti to get back into this one.
Oof. Lots of GGs in the chat.
Yes. They are accurate. So four more energy here. Going to get 3 from the Puzzle Knot, and also getting an extra 1 from the Marvel. Jumping up an extra 3 life.
Oh, and here's a Harness Lightning. Take out the Avacyn.
And that's it.
Yeah, that wasn't RIW, that was RIP. Because that is Kevin Jones taking the lead here in the semi-finals. Temur Marvel 1-0 up over Mardu Vehicles in a classic example of unfair beats fair. Can unfair beat fair again? Find out after these messages. Hello everyone, welcome back, and as you can see we have moved across to our second semi-final. I want to make sure we get camera time for all our final 4, and it is Paul Dean with his Marvel list. He was the first seed coming in against Maxime Aubin. Now Maxime Aubin is not Marvel. Maxime Aubin, I can confirm, is blue-red control, but it is true that Paul Dean apparently is 1 to the good. So we're going to say and watch game number 2 here. Maxime Aubin very much with Torrential Gear Hulks and Disallows and Harness Lightnings and Magma Sprays. That is very definitely the blue-red control list for him, so we'll get that fixed for you. As the players take a look for their game number 2, And when this game is done, we will head back across and see what's going on in our other semi-final, where Kevin Jones took a very straightforward Ulamog lead in game number 1. So
Paul Dean has to feel thrilled, by the way, beating Blue-Red Control in the first game.
Right, because you thought the Blue-Red was pretty favored in game 1, right?
Yeah, game 2, I think it gets very close.
Okay. Yeah. Well, here we go with Thing in the Ice from Maxime Aubin. So Paul Dean is going to get a little bit of cycling action in. And remember, he did mulligan, put the card to the bottom. So fighting a slightly uphill battle here at the start of game 2.
And one of the interesting things about this Blue-Red Control deck is if people are playing against it and they're not familiar with the strategy, they often sideboard out all of their removal because the only creatures they'll see in the first game are Torrential Gearhulks, and
the game's kind of over at the point at which those come down, or should be.
Yeah, unless you're really kind of going wide, if you will.
Right.
The problem is post-sideboard, the Blue-Red Control deck will bring in Thing in the Ice, which can become a Woken Horror, and will also bring in Dragon Master Outcast. So if you're sideboarding out all of your removal spells, suddenly they have these really inexpensive things that they can do while also holding up in counter magic, and it just makes things a disaster for them.
So Thing in the Ice with its 4 counters, Maxime with 5 land. Here's Harness Lightning trying to reach out to deal with said Thing in the Ice. Now there's a Censor over there, which is not going to be sufficient, quite clearly. What else have we got going on? Looks like a Glimmer of Genius we can see. And Maxime's going to say, okay, that actually takes out my Thing in the Ice.
Interesting, because he does also have a Dispel in hand.
Right, so he decided it was not worth the fight, rather than couldn't fight. Here's a tune with Ether for Paul. So the energy count starts again for him.
And in a lot of ways, these types of situations are really, really interesting because Maxime kind of had a pretty impressive board presence with that 0-4. It may seem odd that's an impressive board presence, but just the inevitability of it.
I was going to say, because you're not looking at the 0-4, you're looking at fast-forwarding the game to, like you said, the inevitability. It's like, at some point, I will have cast enough things, so this is an Awoken Horror. Here's Glimmer of Genius from Maxime. And because we're in post-board, he's sort of just offering that up, and we're going to see a negate from Paul Dean. And now, here we see a Dispel back the other way. Paul takes a look and goes, well, all right then. So now Glimmer of Genius does resolve. The energy goes in. There's Mountain and I think just Ether Hub there. So 2 new cards. That's much better, thank you. Thing in the Ice certainly amongst the 2 spells that arrived. There's another spell off the top. Is that a pull from tomorrow he's just drawn?
I believe it is, yes. And Maxime playing this beautifully, saying, I don't want to fight over this Thing in the Ice. Glimmer of Genius, that I will gladly fight over.
Yeah, absolutely. So here we go again with Thing in the Ice looking to meet a Harness Lightning. Now, obviously the game's a little bit older. There's a few more mana on both sides. But also, with this being the second Thing in the Ice, is this going to be something that Maxime decides to argue about? Well, it is. He's going to just say, never mind arguing, I win. Yes. I want it. So there is Thing in the Ice. Now, of course, you don't get a counter off it because the Thing in the Ice isn't in play yet off the Censor. So it sits there as 4 counters, and it will tick down towards, potentially, inevitability. So, yeah, there you go, Unknown Dutch. Counter doesn't come off.
Oh, actually, was it in play? Because he attempted a Harness Lightning? Was that... It was in play, correct?
Ah, right, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
So
yes, of course.
have removed a counter, yes.
Yep, there we go.
He,
and they didn't.
He forgot.
Yep. And so did I. So here is Chandra, 5 loyalty. Here's a pair of 3/1s, which are getting turned sideways. Now, here we get some refill for Maxime.
And Maxime, one problem here for him is, he used that Censor, and in doing so, he opened himself up to be facing off against Chandra Flamecaller.
Yep, and that's exactly what we do have, and she has a fair amount of inevitability too.
And that's to be sure.
Sitting around on the table, that could do some very bad things to Maxime here. Paul Dean, remember, 1-0 up. And Maxime now has got commit to memory. Did you say he was potentially bringing in Dragon Master Outcast? He got a couple of those in the board.
Yeah, in post-boarded games, the deck often brings in Dragon Master Outcast and Thing in the Ice, usually as a package. The Thing in the Ices are quite strong in this matchup.
Paul Dean draws.
Because they require more than the Harness Lightning has to offer. So that, drain your opponent's energy.
Right. So there's a Mountain and an Ulamog, 2 of the 3 cards in hand for Paul. And that Mountain represents land number 7 in the quest for 10.
Yes.
Which increasingly we're seeing be a factor here.
Yeah, so Paul minusing 4 this Chandra with the intention of getting Thing in the Ice off the table. It works.
Now here's a Tune with Ether, which was the other card. So again, let's think about how many mana we're up to. Energy ticks up to 4. Tune with Ether fetches out a land, which is great in the raw sense of here's another one, and marginally bad in terms of 1 fewer to find naturally off the top of your deck each time.
Yes.
So it is not a literal +1 land in a sense, but of course on the table that's exactly what it does. 7 there, and he's still got that Mountain in hand, plus Ulamog. Maxime looks like pulling the trigger on a pull from tomorrow, which would be for 3. So he's leaving up counter magic, leaving up a negate or a dispel there. So he will get to draw 3 and discard 1, but having lost the pull from tomorrow itself, that's not a huge return. However, 3 solid spells go into hand, and now he has to decide what to get rid of. But that was all very nice for Maxime Aubin.
Yeah, now Maxime has a handful of gorgeous spells. He has a Torrential Gear Hulk. He has hard counter magic. He has commit to memory. Looks like he may even have a Glimmer of Genius. Yeah, he does. So he has everything. He's got the world at his disposal here.
But Paul is sitting there heading towards Ulamog and still has Chandra. And he's just going to bin off all 3 cards. He's going to say, can I just leave Chandra at 1 loyalty, activate this? Now, in theory, you could disallow that, could you?
I believe you could, yes.
And presumably, anytime someone does that and wants to, it's like, you don't like your hand? Maybe I should let you keep your hand. I don't know. Paul Dean gets to draw 4 because he pitched 3. And still has all 7 mana to work with. That just the change, as it were, in loyalty on Chandra stays at 1.
And that's a really powerful effect on Chandra. I mean, it's often drawing a lot of fresh cards. And when you're this many turns off of casting Ulamog, and one of the cards in your hand is just a land that at this stage of the game is not very impressive, it stands to reason that you'd rather be generating card advantage out of your Chandra rather than simply trying to attack Maxime when he has Torrential Gear Hulk mana now, and he just drew a whole bunch of cards off the top of his deck.
If you're Maxime, are you in any rush to cast your Torrential Gear Hulk, or are you looking to get to 8 or 9 mana to eventually go Torrential Gear Hulk with proper counterspell backup?
I think the Dispel is good enough for him to go for it, especially considering he has the Glimmer of Genius in his graveyard.
Okay, so it would counter a Harness Lightning, which would be the natural response here. So let's see what happens. Let's see how it plays out. Here's Torrential Gear Hulk. And Glimmer of Genius is what's going to be on offer. Dispel meets Dispel.
And I think Paul actually has another
one.
Dispel.
He does. Which spell?
This one.
Yeah, so away go 3 Dispels in total, and away goes Glimmer of Genius. Doesn't alter the fact there's a Torrential Gearhulk on the board.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Torrential Gearhulk is here, Paul was forced to fight over that Glimmer of Genius because it's such a powerful card in terms of the way it's going to set up Maxime's hand for the future turns.
Right.
But in the meantime, there's now a 5/6 on the table, and that's going to be able to kill this Chandra Flamecaller. And in addition to doing that, it's, 4 turns later, it could also kill Paul Dean.
A very valid question in chat. Is someone lifting weights in the background? No, although actually, technically, yes. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of chairs and tables are being dismantled off in the distance. So what you're hearing are chairs becoming storage, essentially. And that is one of the occupational hazards of the back end of GPs, because it turns out that this hall gets used for a conference tomorrow morning, and everyone has to be out in a timely fashion. So yes, there are some noises off. Nothing we can do about that, I'm afraid, but hopefully you can still enjoy the top 4 action here from Grand Prix Montreal.
So Paul Dean would rather have his Chandra in play than have that Lumbering Falls out and choose to chump block here.
Mm-hmm.
Keep his Planeswalker in play for another turn. I mean, he knows that he needs to keep that in play if he ever wants to get back in this game, because Maxime has way more cards in hand and presumably way more resources.
Yeah, so Paul's drawn a Rogue Refiner there, so that obviously has him the opportunity for some energy and a card back. So that is going to be his play. Maxime will pick up his 4 cards and go, well, let's have that as a 1-for-1 rather than you getting a bonus card out of it. And now Paul Dean says, how about an Aetherworks Marvel? And Maxime has the Void Shatter ready. So now, what does Paul do? He says, I'll discard my 0 cards and draw 0 cards +1 off Chandra. Here comes Maxime, and this time Chandra, which has been around for a long time in this game, is done. And now Maxime is 4 hits of that Torrential Gearhulk away from the end and 1-1. Maxime, meanwhile, has Thing in the Ice number 3 in this game. 2 of them have been successfully dealt with by Paul Dean. But right now, that's not even his biggest concern. The Torrential Gearhulk absolutely is.
Absolutely. Tireless Tracker is going to help. We have to remember Paul Dean's still at 20 life here. And, Maxime has Commit to Memory, which is a decent answer here. But, we'll go back on the top of Paul's library. So Maxime going to need to hit something off that Glimmer of Genius, but as we know, Glimmer of Genius is very good at hitting something. I mean, you get to look essentially 4 cards deep to find an answer to that Tireless Tracker in the meantime.
So Paul just adds an 8th land. It's Lumbering Falls. He gets a clue on the Tireless Tracker.
Oh, that's surprising. That resolved to me. Well, Maxime is going for the commit right now, or the Glimmer of Genius right now.
So Paul hears the clue. Counter on the Tireless Tracker, draws. He's drawn a Rogue Refiner. Now here's Maxime's Glimmer of Genius. Thing in the Ice goes to 3. Energy goes up to 4. Let's take a look at a Torrential Gearhulk and an Ether Hub. Draw the Torrential Gearhulk and this other random card off the top, which turned out to be a Mountain.
Yeah, now he gets a Torrential Gearhulk for another Glimmer of Genius. And once you start chaining these draw 2s with this deck, it becomes very hard to lose. Because, you just bury your opponent at card advantage, and the hard counters, the cards like Void Shatter, those are just going to prevent anything from being able to kill you. And this is one of those decks where Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunker, can destroy 2 permanents, and Blue Red Control will still be able to win without too much excessive effort, because, they can simply counter the Ulamog itself, not have to deal with the body, lose a few lands, or they can just commit. and put the Ulamog second from the top. Now, Maxime's trying to figure out what his play is here. He's going to get in there with the Torrential Gearhulk, decides, we're going to close this game out. We're going to move on to a third one pretty soon. So, Paul Dean looking to get back in the game, leaning really hard on this tireless tracker right now.
I can tell you, Jake Van Lunen, that we have our first finalist. By 2-0, Kevin Jones defeats Max McVitie. Mardu Vehicles is done, and one Team of Marvel list is in to the top 2. Will it be triumphant? Well, Blue-Red Control is in the way, and looking like it's going to force a Game 3 here. Paul Dean looking to make it an all-Marvel Mirrormatic Universe final. And we'll see whether that can happen or not. So stick with us right here. Marshall Sutcliffe and Paul Cheon will be with you for the call on the final. But will it be all Marvel, or will Maxime, after forcing a Game 3 here, take out Paul Dean and then have to do it all over again against Kevin Jones, who waits for the winner in the final? Here we go with Paul Dean with Attune with Ether. Up to 5 energy he goes. Tireless Tracker still with that 1 counter. A very, very busy set of graveyards. My word, we've gone through some cards this game. Maxime with at least a dozen or so, and Paul Dean similarly. It looks like 15 cards in Dean's graveyard already.
Yeah, I mean, he used that Chandra Zero ability, and that fills up your graveyard real quick.
Admittedly, he used it the second time to put 0 cards into the graveyard.
Fair enough.
But yeah, the first time was 3 and then draw 4. So well done to Kevin Jones. He's just popping outside to prepare himself for the final, which could be a ways off yet. And look, Jake, one of the things that people sometimes forget, it's still, yes, it's only 6 o'clock here in Montreal, but it's a good bet that Maxime Aubin has played a lot of Magic today. With Blue-Red Control.
Yes. I'm sure his matches have gone plenty long.
Right. The 2-0 victories don't take 10 minutes for him.
Absolutely not. Something that's interesting to note is I'm interested to find out why Maxime chose to use Commit to Memory on the Rogue Refiner as opposed to this Tireless Tracker here. The Rogue Refiner, when Paul draws it to replay it, it's going to give Paul more energy and allow him to draw a card. Meanwhile, the Tireless Tracker is actually bigger while it's on the table. So I'd be interested to ask Maxime about that afterward. I'm sure there's a reason why.
Paul is down to 10. The Thing in the Ice is down to 2, but that's down in a good way if you're Maxime.
Something that is especially exciting about Thing in the Ice is the way it returns Torrential Gearhulks back to your hand.
Yes. So look, here is Torrential Gearhulk for Glimmer of Genius, and we have entered the burying in card advantage stage of the game.
Yes.
Which, if you're a control mage, gladdens the heart and makes you feel what a day to be alive. But if you're not a control player, just saddens the soul in the most terrible, terrible ways. And, I pity you.
I mean, this is the thing about when you're playing against control, though. You'll often get into these situations where, they've gotten so far ahead on cards, and they've sculpted their hand, and they've come ahead on the board, that your chance of winning is practically non-existent. And, especially in the top 8 of a Grand Prix, you have to play it out. You have to try. But it is a bit disheartening to watch as your life is slowly bled away.
But that's the idea. You don't just want to beat them, you want them to know they've been beaten, to have felt every little dagger along the way.
I want to feel beaten.
And I mean, I'm being genuine there. That's not about being unkind. That's part of the weaponry of the control mage, because there are times when you are sitting there with nothing, and it is critical that your opponent thinks they have something. They always have something.
Absolutely.
And that is all part of that. That is nothing to do with the personal interaction or just how you like to win at Magic. It is a really, really important facet of playing any kind of control deck properly.
And we've seen it today. People leaving mana untapped, passing the turn. Even when they have more than 7 cards in their hand, they had castable cards. Discarding at the end of the turn simply to represent counter magic to their opponent.
Yeah. All right, so Paul Dean, is there any way back for you? You've got a tireless tracker, you've got a clue, you've got a couple of cards in hand, you're up to the magic 10 number for Ulamog. Maxime?
Ulamog, that's the answer, I believe.
Right, Maxime, though.
Although I don't know if there's enough time.
No.
I think this may be the end of the game.
Harness Lightning. Thing about to resolve into an Awoken Horror. Paul's got a Glimmer of Genius. So, energy is up to 12. Here's an Awoken Horror. Back come 2 Torrential Gearhulk. Away goes Tireless Tracker. Now there's just a clue. Now Paul has plenty of draws coming his way in terms of a clue and a Glimmer of Genius, potentially. But Maxime has multiple Gearhulks and an Awoken Horror.
Yeah, that's a 7/8 body that Maxime just paid 2 mana for earlier in the game. And the spells that he cast that eventually flipped that into a 7/8, he would have cast those spells anyway. Thing in the Ice is a very, very powerful card, especially if you're playing it in a matchup where the opponent doesn't have efficient ways to kill it post-sideboard.
Disallow.
Yeah, so here we see Maxime activating his Wandering Fumarole, and when Paul Dean attempts to block with the Lumbering Falls...
Yeah, to make a Lumbering Falls, it's like, no.
No, your land's not a creature.
And so it is 1-1. Well, that's great because we now get to see a game 3 for, I was going to say for all the marbles, but it's potentially for all the marvels. Because if Paul Dean wins, it will be an all-marvel final against Kevin Jones, who, as a reminder, he went through the bracket on the other side. He defeated Daniel Fournier in a Marvel Mirror by 2-1, and then he defeated Max McVitie of the United States by 2-0. Max was playing Mardu Vehicles. So that means Kevin Jones is waiting for the winner of this next game in our second semi-final. A reminder, meanwhile, that over at Grand Prix Santiago, Gregor Kowalski of Poland, Javier Luna, Mauro Sasso, and Nicholas Epstein of Argentina, Chileans Ignacio Saez and Daniel Vega, Brazilian Guillaume Merriam, and former World Magic Online champion Niels Norlander of the Netherlands. Those are the players in the top 8 there. And you can check out all the lists of the relevant decks as we go along. Very similar, the 2 compositions of the top 8. 3-teamer Marvel on both venues. 2 Mardu Vehicles lists. 1 blue-red control. 1 mono-black zombies. And then 1 slight difference.
Yes.
Red-green energy over in Santiago and black-green aggro. That was Sean McLaren. Constrictor, whatever you want to call it. In here, and Paul, and when
that was
Sean,
an exciting deck to watch.
It was, and when Sean lost the quarterfinal, he just gave a shrug and went, "Yeah, another top 8, fair enough. Can't complain. Good weekend.
I'll take it."
Yeah. So at some point we'll get that clue removed from the center of the screen because we don't. I don't think Paul needs any help.
So Paul knows what he's doing.
Handicap magic. You just give someone a clue to start with. It's like, I know you haven't got a clue, so I'm going to give you one. And you just say that to your opponent, and you're just like,
yeah, that's, to make them feel good.
Well, that's one
about their chances of winning.
That's one way of looking at it. Yes. Yeah.
This matchup, though, as we talked about earlier, it's actually gone the opposite of the way that I thought it would. In the first game, I really feel like Maxime has a pretty big advantage. Mm-hmm. But in the second and third game, Paul is able to bring in a lot more interaction. He's able to kind of play Maxime's game, but he has better finishing. So I think the blue-red deck might still be a slight favorite in post-boarded games, maybe, but I think that it's a pretty big favorite in game 1. So Paul, very happy that he stole game 1, hoping that now being on the play in game 3, he'll have the tools he needs to overcome this blue-red control deck and move on to the finals. Maxime, on the other hand, he knows that in this second and third game, Paul is armed with cards like Dispel and Negate, and he's going to have to play around those cards in addition to leaving open the necessary tools to answer and successfully respond to powerful effects like Aetherworks Marvel.
So on the one hand, and I know that some people will not be thrilled with this viewpoint, if Paul Dean did advance to the final, there would be something deeply elegant, not only about seeing the deck of the weekend face off in the final, but the fact that we would see both flavors of how to win the mirror in the final. You'd see Kevin Jones with his Nissa's Renewal, oh look, I've got 6 land, oh look, I've got 9 land, oh look, I've got 10 land. And you've got Paul Dean with Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, multiple copies, oh look, I got past 7 land, now I've got 10 land, thanks. And so the idea that both of them are accelerated Marvel in some ways as the two key components facing off in the final would certainly put a bow on what has been a great weekend for Marvel. That said, I know that a lot of the audience are going to be rooting for blue-red control in this game.
Oh, I'm sure of it. But I am really excited by what Paul Dean did. The addition of those Shrine of the Forsaken Gods to the deck, like that really does change the way a mirror is played in the post-boarded games.
So let's do this. It's game number 3. Let's see whether Paul Dean or Maxime Aubin advance to the final to face Kevin Jones. Paul Dean on turn 2 gets 1 energy out of Ether Hub. Maxime on turn 2 lays out Thing in the Ice. Is there going to be a no, you can't have that? There isn't. Is there going to be a Harness Lightning? No, there isn't. There's just going to be a Cycling Dissenter's Deliverance. Paul Dean untaps for turn number 3. Draws. There is one of the Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, one of the signature cards in his deck.
And it may not seem that threatening. You think to yourself, oh, so I guess he just needs 9 lands to cast Annual Mog? That's not realistic. But 9 is a lot more realistic than 10. And 8 seems easy.
Yes. People have been known to play cards that cost 8 without help.
Yes.
Without ramp, you just go, well, I've got one of these and eventually I'll get there. Very different. Every mana, basically every mana past 5, it starts curving upwards more and more above the simple +1. It's more turns, more action, more convoluted hoops to get through. So yeah, a really significant deck building move from Dean, who has his Rogue Refiner to put Maxime down to 17. And now Dean will attempt an attune with Ether. Both players very respectful of attempting their spells, knowing that the other side could be saying no at any moment.
Yeah, I mean, when you know your opponent has counter magic, you can't just play Attune with Ether and pick up your library. It's in bad form. Although, for the record, there are very few situations where your opponent's going to be countering an Attune with Ether.
Right.
Paul attacking with that Rogue Refiner there. A bit of a bluff there.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that it's unlikely Maxime's going to block because it's telling Maxime, hey, I have a Harness Lightning, and I would like to only cast that Harness Lightning
for one. I was going to say, because the actual Harness Lightning, it kills it either way. It doesn't depend on being blocked or not, but it's just the idea of conserving energy.
Precisely.
So I anticipate, talking of Harness Lightning, we see one in Maxime Aubin's hand. What we also see for red mana, which is significant, is a Dragon Master Outcast, the little 1/1 that, well, can't at the moment, but somewhere down the line absolutely could, and could get very out of hand. Makes 5/5 flyers, of course, long term.
Maxime, still with no red mana, is leaning toward the Harness Lightning. No? Okay. Goes for Commit to Memory.
So he untaps. Does now have access to red mana, which is great.
Yeah, that was very, very important for him.
Yep. Obviously, he has to take a turn off from it, so can't represent any Harness Lightning chicanery at the moment. But that's probably fine. The Rogue Refiner likely gets in again.
Another thing that I like about Paul's list, especially for this weekend, is that he's playing the 4 Glimmer of Genius. I think that, a lot of lists were on the fence about whether or not they wanted the Glimmers.
Mm-hmm.
And in this weekend, there's a lot of control, and a card like Glimmer of Genius allows you to pick fights on your opponent's end step. The other thing is that in mirror matches, they often become control games for games 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a card like Glimmer of Genius, then you can pick fights with your opponent on their end step, and they often don't want to fight those fights, and that's okay, because then you're resolving Glimmer of Genius.
Yes. Yep. I believe that's what we refer to as having them coming and going.
Yes, precisely.
In colloquial terms. As Paul now looks to land number 6, and there is Shrine of the Forsaken Gods. Let's remember that accelerates towards Ulamog. Could become relevant here in Game 3 of the semi-finals. Aubin with just the Thing in the Ice and 4 land. Paul's going to pass. So end step, Aubin says, can I have this Glimmer of Genius? And what's Paul looking to do about this? He's playing around with his mana. Thing in the Ice goes to 2.
Ooh, a glimmer of his own.
Glimmer in response. Okay. So energy is up to 7. There's a negate there. Hello. Okay.
Yeah, and negate's wonderful here. I mean, the thing about Maxime's deck is it can't really punish you for tapping out there. Where Paul Dean cast an end-step Glimmer of Genius, and Maxime basically cannot fight that war. Because if he does, Paul's threatening to untap and drop Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger onto the battlefield with Aetherworks Marvel. However, when Maxime goes for an end-step Glimmer of Genius when he didn't have anything to counter, Paul Dean can fight that fight, because on the next turn, Maxime's not going to have access to the 6 mana to Torrential Gearhulk it back.
So here is the negate. Says no. So there was a Glimmer of Genius, but it went to Paul Dean in the end. And Maxime, who's been struggling for land, stays struggling for land. He just stays on 4. How big a deal was that negate on Glimmer of Genius?
It was huge. Maxime really needs to hit land drops. That's the most important thing for him right now. And by missing a land drop on another key turn here, he's just falling further and further behind. And it sounds crazy, but before he's to Torrential Gearhulk range, it's conceivable that Paul's already going to be dropping Ulamogs on him.
Another Rogue Refiner gets Paul Dean up to serious amounts of energy. Though, as we've seen, the Marvel, once it misses once, that takes care of 6. You do definitely want to be at 12 plus, ideally. Here's Censor.
Wow.
See, yet again.
There's nothing better than watching somebody get censored. It feels so good.
Dearie me. Maxime just really struggling for land. And that's, again, that negate off the Glimmer to counter the Glimmer is looking more and more like it's putting Paul Dean in prime position to head towards the top 8. There's a 5th land. It comes into play untapped. That's good for Maxime. He's got a Disallow. He's got Dispel over there. He's got multiple Gearhulks. He's got 6 cards in total, but he's on 11. There's an Aetherworks Marvel for Paul.
Yeah, now Paul can spin that this turn if he's able to resolve it, and that's not unlikely considering what's in Maxime's hand. I mean, Paul's likely going to be swinging with both Rogue Refiners here, and Maxime's been taking all the damage from these Rogue Refiner attacks. He's been playing around Harness Lightning this whole time, and at some point, he's going to have to start blocking.
Yeah, and there it is. So 1 block, Maxime falls into single figures. The Thing in the Ice, for now, stays alive.
Maxime likely holding a spell that could flip this into Awoken Horror at any moment.
All right, how about this Aetherworks Marvel? Maxime, you got 5 mana. Cards aren't the problem. So there's a negate for the Marvel. Is it time to fight, Paul?
And he's got to think about it. I mean, the problem with fighting now is that if Maxime is able to find that 6th land, then he can untap and start Gearhulking for Glimmer of Genius.
Dispel.
However, if you win the fight, you might just win the game.
Right. And the match, which is a semi-final of a Grand Prix where you're about to play for $10,000.
Yep.
It's not an insignificant moment. Thing in the Ice is going to transform. The horror is awoken. Now here's Disallow for the Marvel. It's gone. Paul Dean, 3 mana left. Rogue Refiner, Energy, Card. It's in a tune with Ether.
And it looks like Maxime may have established the control he needs to win this game. If he's able to draw land on this coming turn, then I really like his chances. He has multiple Gearhulks.
He did.
And there it is.
Wow.
Yeah.
Maxime Aubin from what looked a really tough position. Paul Dean pecking away with the Rogue Refiners over and over while Maxime struggled for land, lost to Counterspell War over Glimmer of Genius, and that looked like it was really going to punish him, but he's found his way to 6 mana. He's got an Awoken Horror. The Thing in the Ice has done what it does. And now Maxime Aubin is on the offensive with 6 mana, cards in hand. Wow.
Yeah, this is crazy. I mean, a pair of Torrential Gearhulks is going to be pretty hard for Paul Dean to beat with his hand.
But how much mana does Paul have? He's up to Ulamog range.
Does he have an... Yes, he does have an untapped land in hand, so I believe he can cast Ulamog, which is going to be plenty good to get this Awoken Horror off the table. I think he's now deciding whether or not he wants to attack with the Rogue Refiner first. Because if he attacks the Rogue Refiner first, then he may just be attacking into a Torrential Gearhulk. But that might not be the worst thing for him, because that will give him an opportunity to tap out, cast the Ulamog, exile the Torrential Gearhulk and the Awoken Horror while Maxime is tapped out. And then he has the Ulamog on the table. And we know the only thing Maxime can do about that is commit to memory.
So a question from chat. Gearhulk disallows the Ulamog trigger. He commits it and swings for lethal if Paul smacks with the Rogue Refiner. Question mark. Lots of people talking about disallowing one Ulamog trigger. People saying that's not lethal, it's one short.
That is one short.
Fujin Sensei, yes, he does have 8 land currently, but one of them is Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, which is one of the key moments, key parts of Paul Dean's deck. It gets him 2 mana.
And
here.
if he is going to cast the Ulamog, he wants to... Oh, okay,
here we go.
Here it goes.
Here we go. Big moment, huge moment here in the game 3 of the semifinals. Ulamog, get rid of your tap, comes into play tapped land, and Awoken Horror. Maxime Aubin, ball in your court.
Yeah. And now Aubin can Torrential Gearhulk and use Disallow to counter the trigger on the Ulamog. Or he can use Torrential Gearhulk to counter the Ulamog itself, if he needs be. See, what I was suggesting, by the way, to chat, was that he swing with the Rogue Refiner first, trying to bait the Torrential Gearhulk.
Right.
That way, Maxime is tapped out when he casts the Ulamog, and he cannot disallow the Ulamog trigger.
Sure.
But this play, obviously, gets Maxime dead faster. It's
all right.
Safer. Oh, let's see what happens. Okay.
Here we go. Torrential Gearhulk for a Glimmer of Genius.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. Maxime does have Commit to Memory in hand.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Yeah, little known text on Disallow.
Maxime untaps with a Torrential Gearhulk opposite Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger and a Rogue Refiner. He's at 8. Lays an untapped land, number 6. Yeah, the energy counter doesn't tap. That is true. So here's commit. Send it away. Aubin swings with the Torrential Gearhulk.
And I feel like Paul's got to feel okay about that. I can't imagine that he would want to block here, but you know, he may be thinking about the only ways he can lose, because I think he has another Ulamog
He
in
does.
his hand.
Yes, he does. He does.
Which means he's casting an Ulamog next turn and then can potentially cast an Ulamog the next turn.
The next turn.
So,
what are you doing this turn? Ulamog. How about next turn? Ulamog. What if there's another turn? I'll just cast an Ulamog.
yeah, he is chaining Ulamogs. forever.
Here we are again. My word, has the ship sailed on Maxime Aubin? Here is Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, once more. Attack for 3. Aubin down to 5. Dean at 8. Ulamog is back in business.
Yeah, and Dean, knows now that Maxime used that commit to memory, and he only has 1 in his 75. So Paul now knows there is the only card that could get it off the table at this point is a Brutal Expulsion.
Okay.
Which I don't even think he would bring in.
Right. I mean, there's 1 copy in the sideboard.
So in the full 75, that's the only thing that could happen here.
But the commit Torrential Gearhulk brings back...
Yeah.
Brings back commit.
Torrential Gearhulk can flash back the commit. But then the problem is you're tapped out and there's another Ulamog on the top of your opponent's library.
He's showing it, and it's like, yep.
Yeah.
And there we go. And Paul Dean.
Wow. That was a great game. Yeah, I mean, even if he does Torrential Gearhulk back the commit, there's just another Ulamog on the top of Paul's library. And then he's in the exact same situation.
Paul Dean dodges bullets aplenty and is through to the final of Grand Prix Montreal. Absolutely amazing magic. Gulp. All right, we're going to calm down. And when we come back, Marshall Sutcliffe and Paul Cheon will be sitting in these very warmed seats for the final of Grand Prix Montreal. Don't you dare go away.